Well, this is an important election year for Florida.
Hmm.
We're going to elect a new governor. We have a U.S. Senate race. We have congressional races. We have legislative races. This is a big year for voters in Florida. And you had an interesting conversation with somebody who knows something about voting.
Yes, indeed. I had a chance to sit down recently with Dianna Wynn, the League of Women Voters U.S. president. She'd come to West Palm Beach and speaking about both the sanctity of the vote and concerns about the vote. We've already heard the president talking about the fact that he wants to Save America Act, that he's worried about the vote, still questioning the 2020 vote. Many worry that the Save America Act will disenfranchise voters. Republicans in the House, anyway, in Washington argue it will create a more secure vote. So you have this huge dynamic tension going on. The mirror image of that we'll talk about in a few minutes is that in Florida, we've already passed a brand new, tougher voter ID law that seeks to mirror this National SAVE Act before Congress. So with that backdrop, let's first listen to Dianna Wynn in that interview. Again, she's the president, the U.S. president of the League of Women Voters. Thank you very much for your time. What are your concerns about the elections, the midterm elections?
Mhm. My greatest concern with the midterm elections, and quite frankly with every election, is voter turnout. We need voters to turn out and actually exercise their right to express their voice via the ballot box. So we're working very hard to not only get people registered, but even more so, those who are registered to get to the ballot box and vote their values.
Your thoughts, your opinion on President Trump's Save America Act. We don't know where that will ultimately go in the Senate, but tell us what's top of mind for you.
So, ever since the Save America Act and in each version that it's been introduced into Congress, the League has been there and leading the fight to oppose this legislation. This legislation is very dangerous in terms of voting rights. In particular, it impacts women. So, this legislation requires certain kinds of documentary proof that you are a citizen before you can even register to vote. And it is proof that is quite frankly not even necessary. Actual voter fraud is exceedingly rare in this nation. So why does it affect women negatively? If you go to register to vote, if this legislation passed, you would have to present documentation and more than one piece of documentation, so like a photo ID, but also a document that shows where you were born in order to prove citizenship. And those documents must match in terms of your name. So think about the approximately 70 million women in this country who changed their name when they married. And now their birth certificate doesn't match their driver's license. And a driver's license alone in most states would not be sufficient proof because it doesn't tell somebody where you were born. So we disenfranchise tens of millions of women and people of color. People of color are 3 times more likely not to have the necessary documentation under this legislation if it were to pass. So the League of Women Voters has been and will continue to fight very hard to defeat this legislation in Congress.
Is it a solution in search of a problem that does not exist?
That is typically the case with legislation that is proposed at the state level in many states and at the federal level that alleges that it is a response to voter fraud. That again is very, very rare. In fact, what it does is it instead disenfranchises voters who have the right to vote, but then we make it difficult or impossible for them to vote. Voter fraud is not a problem in this country. It simply is not a problem.
And mail-in balloting. The president has said he wants to add a ban on mail-in balloting, which of course is the province of the states. But your thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, first of all, under the Constitution, he does not have that authority. President Trump has issued executive orders, and there may be more that speak to how elections should be run. The League of Women Voters has defeated through the courts some of those executive orders, and we will continue to fight back against any in the future. So an executive order out of the White House does not control our elections. States determine whether they're going to have mail-in ballots, and most states allow fairly liberal ways to vote by mail, and the manner in which that is done, the details of deadlines and so forth. So that is an issue that we are addressing state by state also when necessary.
And you are willing to fight, and you already are, but to continue fighting in the courts depending on what happens with this legislation.
Absolutely. At any given time, the League of Women Voters can have 50 to 70 lawsuits that we're involved with at the state or federal level, either as a plaintiff or we have filed amicus briefs in them. And a lot of people don't really see the League of Women Voters in that role. We do a lot of voter registration, get out the vote, but we're very much an advocacy organization, especially when it comes to voting rights. So in addition to that civic education that you see to get people to go vote, lobbying against suppressive legislation, we also take it to the courts.
In the state of Florida, for instance, it was Republicans who helped push for and make sure mail-in voting could happen.
Right,
It
right.
has been deemed many times a great success. What's really going on here?
Uh, it depends on the state, but it is a way to suppress the vote. So often looking at it, and it's connected to this false narrative of voter fraud and not really knowing who's voting. Again, mail-in voting in every state is a very popular way to vote, and voter suppression tactics try to keep fewer people from going to the ballot box. So it's important. I have to say this, mail-in voting, it is very safe, it is secure, but it also benefits so many different kinds of populations. Those who are disabled, those who can't get to the ballot box on the day or days where you vote because they work or they have childcare responsibilities. Those who live in rural areas and they don't have a voting location near them. So it's really important that we protect mail-in voting.
I've had people say to me, Michael, I'm worried, will there be a vote at all in November? Do you hear that?
I hear that. I understand why they're concerned because some of the rhetoric that we hear from federal officials. What I would say is we will have elections. We will have elections because the League of Women Voters is here along with other pro-democracy organizations, and we will fight to make sure that we have elections. And our elections, they are safe, secure, and accurate. There is absolutely no reason to believe that we would not have elections come November.
Have elections, but after elections, lawsuits. Republicans may be poised. Certainly the president seems poised if the midterms do not go his way to fight the outcome. How prepared are pro-democracy groups like the League of Women Voters to fight in the courts to make sure that what voters say at the polls, whatever that may be, is an accurate reflection of the outcome and who goes to Congress next year?
We are absolutely geared up for that. So unfortunately, in this day and age, we have too many politicians. When they lose an election, they don't want to accept that loss. Well, in any election, there are winners and there are losers. And when you lose, you cannot use tactics like delaying and throwing out ballots. That is not democracy. So in the past, we've taken it to the courts to make sure every ballot is counted so that we have a fair and free election. So we're absolutely prepared, along with other organizations, our coalition partners in states and at the national level, to make sure your vote is counted and that the will of the people is ultimately represented after an election.
What are your worries about the long-term damage we may be doing to the fabric of our democracy, to faith in our electoral process?
I am worried about the state of democracy. And I think we have good reason to be worried about the state of democracy. The League of Women Voters, for the first time in its 106-year history, has declared a constitutional crisis. We're seeing the executive branch exercise authority that they do not have under the Constitution. We're seeing attacks on the judiciary. We're seeing Congress, quite frankly, not exercising or protecting its constitutional power. And I am concerned about the long-term ramifications and the disrespect for not only the rule of law under the Constitution, but our democratic norms. I think that we're discovering that those norms are more fragile than we realize. So it will depend on the people to make sure that those norms are honored and, through the ballot box, restored. Vote for candidates that you believe will protect and advance democracy.
What is your final message to Americans, no matter their political background, where they are on the political spectrum, about the crossroads we're at and what all of us individually and then collectively need to do about it?
So the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We never have, and we do not endorse or oppose candidates when they're running for elected office, and we do not endorse or oppose political parties. So regardless of your political beliefs or leanings, we believe everyone everyone who is eligible needs to go to the ballot box. But then remember, you're not just a voter. You are a constituent. So in between elections, we need people to be reaching out to their elected officials, letting those elected officials know what you want. When you're not happy, you need to also reach out to them when they're doing the right thing. They need to hear from you then also. Get involved in your community. Go to town halls and government meetings. Be aware of what's going on and get involved in organizations like the League of Women Voters who work on important advocacy issues but are really focused on empowering people to exercise their right to vote.
We appreciate your time very much. Any final top of mind thoughts for you?
Well, across the nation, we're in primary season right now. Depending on what state you're in the November, we're going to have a very important election. And it is critically important that people turn out to vote. And what I want them to know is it's important to vote in every election and in every race on that ballot. And I know some people skip some of the races because they don't know anything about those candidates. So go to vote411.org. It's the League's separate platform for nonpartisan election information, where you can learn about elections in your state and in your community, and you can find out about the candidates. So you're prepared to go vote on that election day. So go vote.
Brian, interesting interview. And to me, one of the headlines is when you hear the League of Women Voters U.S. President say that she thinks we're in a constitutional crisis, that's bracing.
It is. It is. Well, what did you think of her idea that we're in a constitutional crisis?
She argued that when you see constant assaults in her mind on the integrity of the vote, and you heard her interviews, I'm not putting words in her mouth, they're concerned when there's this constant debate about voting and who can vote, and concerns from her perspective and that of many about whether people will be disenfranchised by efforts by others to secure the vote. It creates a dynamic tension that leads her and others to say, we're in a very tough place. And now you have Republicans on the flip side who argue that they're concerned. I would say this, Brian, we recently on our podcast had the Palm Beach County Supervisor election. So we have a secure vote. Fraud is very, very rare. Floridians, including in past election cycles, Governor Ron DeSantis, have talked about how well the Florida vote went. You've talked about this for years. One of the things with the Save America Act that the president would like to do, get rid of mail-in voting. And yet mail-in voting in many places, including Florida, was spearheaded by Republicans to great effect. And again, people saying, is this a solution in search of a problem? Mail-in voting has worked. Fraud is very, very rare. Non-citizens are not allowed to vote in federal elections. And we don't need a SAVE Act to change that. So you've covered the political scene as longer, and more adeptly than most I know. I'd throw that back at you. What's your take? What's going on here?
I think that I think it's silly to get rid of mail-in voting, or to streamline it a great deal. There are a lot of older people who, in Florida, I'll just talk about Florida, who need to mail-in voting. It's not easy for them to go somewhere and vote in a precinct. They might have, infirmities. They may not have transportation. And there's a lot of older people in Florida that are like that. They're making exemptions apparently for the military and some other groups. If you're stationed overseas, obviously you need to mail in vote. I've always wondered why people are going to think I'm nuts when I say this. I'd like to see online voting.
Mm-hmm.
Just let's all vote online, and people go, but it's not secure. Okay,
Well, you've at least guaranteed we
let's
rely
see.
emails are doing that. I do.
Most people are doing their banking online,
Yeah.
so you're trusting
Yeah.
that nobody's going to steal all your money. Most people are shopping online, and what are they doing? So they get on Amazon or whatever to shop, and they're giving them their credit card information and a lot of other personal information so they can shop. Uh,
But it is stolen sometimes.
it's sure, but the history throughout America's history, there has been chicanery during elections. That's how we came up with the phrase "stuff the ballot box," you know, and it actually improved with technology. We had a royal screw up in the 2000 election with our hanging chads.
Yes, I remember. Yes. I have
But
frequent driver miles to Tallahassee.
But after that mistake, they got rid of all of that and brought in new sophisticated machinery, and has been noted, whether it's the 2020 election or other elections, there's generally, when they double check, triple check, quadruple check the ballots, there's no fraud.
Well, the league pointed that out. They also noted that for you, me, we take it for granted. We have passport, other ID. They said voter registration could become enormously more difficult. You heard Ms. Wynn talk about that because a lot of people, let's take somebody, they're worried for women. Your maiden name, different than your married name. Now you've got to go find the documents that show you the same person. They're very worried. How many people might not be able to vote because of that? Also, voting has historically been the province of the states. So even if, and right now it's stuck in the Senate with no guarantee that the SAVE Act will pass the Senate, even if it did, one could well imagine court challenges. But it speaks, Brian, that we're going to head into November, huge midterms, whatever side of that political equation you're on at home. Republicans have many arguments about wanting to secure the vote more. Democrats, we've already talked about some of their concerns. But yet again, something that we always have taken for granted, that we'd have a generally non-contentious vote in the sense of we'd all accept the outcome of the vote. I feel like it's Alice in Wonderland now, down the rabbit hole. And one more reason for us to question institutions, to question each other. When you ask me what I think, it's like, we're all punch drunk, no matter where you are, on what side of the equation.
But I would add that this started with Al Gore. In the 2000 election, he didn't accept the results.
Right.
He challenged the results. He went to,
but he ultimately accepted a Supreme Court decision
because he had no choice.
Yeah, he has no
Supreme Court decided 5-4.
Now,
we didn't storm the Capitol the week after that, and he, gracefully accepted the election results.
Fair point.
But he did not like the Supreme Court opinion.
No.
And we fought it for over 30 days. So there were big battles in Tallahassee over it. There were, the legislature was ready to take action. I mean, it was a huge battle.
Oh, I remember.
And
it was helping come.
But in a way, it also set a precedent for 2020.
Well,
so the difference being he conceded and somebody we know didn't. It still hasn't. But I think another thing that a lot of our viewers / listeners probably listen to the League of Women Voters and go, They're a bunch of Democrats. It's a liberal.
She made it.
It's a liberal organization.
She
Well,
made it
no, they.
crystal clear that they're not. And
Well,
and
I
think
understand
going-
that, but
well,
their reputation. Am I wrong?
I think I will take in fairness and at face value that they argue they do not
No,
endorse.
understood.
They
But no,
they
I'm
do not
talking about,
endorse
what they say. I'm talking about what their image is.
Well, but who gives them the image? People who don't like
Well-
what they stand for. So it's not their self-created image.
I apologize, Darlene. I know I'm going to be in trouble for saying what I did.
A friend of his. Oh yeah, she knows how to.
But
reach.
that is
No,
a perception.
I hear you.
Conservatives do not believe, they don't listen to the League of Women Voters because they perceive them as being a liberal organization.
Sure.
You know, but and I just wanted to note that for people who might be listening. So you know,
Including Darlene, who will definitely.
oh yeah, I'll hear about it. But the
No, it's all. No, that's the perspective we like to bring.
what else did she have to say that intrigued you?
Well, I think, we kind of covered the waterfront on that. I think, the one thing she did say, which seems like duh, but she said, we could start by everybody getting out and voting, which aside from any other issues that you may have, if you're on the conservative side of the spectrum about the vote or the liberal side, be that as it all may, still a lot of Americans, a lot of Floridians who just don't vote. And so she kept coming back to the theme, get out, register, which they argue may be made harder if the Save America Act is passed. Conservatives argue it will secure the vote. We've talked about that already. But we do tend to forget that part. Get out and vote.
Sure,
Register
yeah,
to vote.
absolutely.
So that's number one, whatever side you're on. So
Well, and I would,
it's
and
kind of interesting that we have to say that in
what
2026.
might also be interesting too is if pass the Save America Act. It's your Republicans are really pushing hard for that. Well, it's not going to be just Democratic women who have to go find their birth certificates because they got married or got divorced and their name changed. It's Republicans and independents will have to do the same thing. So if we get enough women who have to go through the arduous process of proving what their last name is, I think you get a little pushback.
Yeah. Well, and you get a little pushback when it's harder. Again, mail-in voting, it's been the province of the states. You could almost guarantee court challenges if the Save America Act passes the Senate and then is something that would go to the president. That's a bunch of ifs at the moment we sit here and talk right now. Be that as it all may, it'll be interesting how that all plays out. I will flip it back and ask you, though. Great history, 2000, but name an election, and I'm sure we can find one, but name a major election of the last 25 years that there was provable, major, widespread fraud.
There hasn't been.
And that's the argument that proponents make, is that you have 67 counties in Florida, 67 election supervisors. Let's keep it to Florida. They argue we do a pretty darn good job. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but we do a pretty darn good job of making sure that every vote's counted. Doesn't mean there's not problems sometimes. We make sure that people only vote if they have a legal right to vote. And I think that's where this fundamental argument comes in. Will this make that even better? Or will this in some way erode that, either intentionally or unintentionally?
Well, and and as I noted on a previous podcast, President Trump vehemently opposed to vote by mail, but then he recently voted by mail, as did his wife and as did his son Barron, in the state house race for the candidate that he endorsed.
Right.
He voted by mail, and his answer was, well, I'm president, I can do that. Well, he spends almost every weekend in Mar-a-Lago.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he's out of town all the time. He didn't have to vote by mail, and he has walked into the voting booth and voted here before. So don't be preaching, I hate vote by mail, while you're doing it yourself. That's just silly.
What's your final takeaway before we let you take it away at home? And as always, we love the give and take. We love your feedback to Top of Mind Florida for every episode, both here with his handsome mug there, George Clooney, as we used to call him in the newsroom. Give me your George Clooney pose. There. and of course, our audio platforms. Final takeaway for this election segment, it's one more piece of the dynamic that will be something you and I will be talking about a lot more in the lead up to November.
Well, thank you for watching or listening to Top of Mind Florida. We hope you subscribe and comment, and above all, vote.